into it now then. Obviously, the big series of the whole tournament was JDG T1, even though people on Reddit got mad. Now, everyone, when you saw the bracket and you knew Gen G was up, that was the real final. Like, whoever wins that, especially now we know Weibo makes it, whoever wins that almost certainly wins World. So let's get into the series. Go on, Kieran, and then we'll all just pick up on it. Yeah. Jump in whenever you want, Sabatine.
So, like, the thing I'd like to highlight is, and this was, like, a big one, not to, like, overanalyze it, but, like, I've watched the series, like, a lot, and there was, like, two characteristics. First of all, Home never tried a ban-out game versus Faker, where he just, like, bans all of, like, Faker's, like, champions, like, the Azir, the Ori, the Akali, and the Nico, and then you pick the next one down for Knight, okay? And then you put Faker onto his, like, fifth best pick, right? Like, that's the idea, okay? And you see, can you do it, right? He never tried that, and he also never tried the give Knight, like, his champion game. Like, give like regardless of meta, you just give Knight whatever he wants, like a Syndra, an Ahri,
sure,
like
classics.
Whatever, like in the do or die game. And at MSI, Home said that's what he'd done to beat T1. He turned to Knight and he asked him in game 5, what do you want? Don't care about team comps. He basically said, can I trust you? And then we never even got to that. Like, Knight just played Ori and the champion ages says what it is. But I was really surprised by that. But in terms of just that series, that was like a weird one. I was just so surprised no one really tried that against T1 at the field, but it worked for them. So
there is an important thing is I think that the whole world, I mean, all the teams that were involved in the side of the bracket overreacted to the fact that T1 brute forced their win condition into the match against LNG.
Yes.
Which you can always do in League of Legends, right? You can always take the most pressuring lanes in the world, which Ashe Varus is probably the most pressuring dual lane that exists in the game. On the top of my head, I don't really have one. And so seeing that T1, and when you do that, and that's probably what people have misunderstood because it needs a lot of experience in watching League of Legends to understand how tight of a rope you walk when you try to pick Ashe Varus and you try to brute force the push you have on the first 3 waves until the enemy nexus, right? You have exactly a margin of probably like half a mistake in the whole game to be able to win the game. And since they won by brute forcing the win condition, all the teams, the leading after LNG were, oh my God, we have to find a way to not let T1 brute force the win condition. So the whole focus of the semi-final against JDG was, we cannot let them have the push in the bot lane. But the truth is, T1 is a very, very good and very well-rounded team outside of this precise style of brute forcing their way into enemy nexus. And so they had a pretty favorable draft because the enemy team like JDG had to ban other win conditions that they thought were more important, and that let T1 on probably their second best playstyle, which they are very comfortable on, and they never had a 60-40 draft against T1. They always had a 50-50 because they were so scared of the Ashe Varus and all these like weird things they saw in the quarterfinals. So I think there is a very big psychological impact of this quarterfinal in the tournament, because they were like, oh, they can play everything we can play, but if they go with these special bot lanes, we lose immediately. Yes. Which is not true, because if you look at the rivalry between Gen G and T1 the whole year, Gen G has been one of the best teams to neutralize the potency of T1 in the early game and just catch them later on with like scaling comps, especially like I think Chovy is very good in this style. And so instead of going that way, they went into the warfare of trying to give them a good draft, but not giving them Ashe Varus, which I think is less scary than T1 on a good draft, and they all lost.
And the other one is, there's a big props, because I was talking to Nymera about it. T1 in all 4 games, regardless of draft, had like unique or very specific level 1s. Every single game, they had a level 1 strat prepared for the given situation that they went in. JDG never had any, and well, they had like basic level 1s, but not specific ones. And almost 3 out of 4 level 1s for T1 gave them like massive advantage. So you can't give. I don't know who specifically is like designing them. It could be coach, could be jungle, could be anyone, because they're a pretty coherent effort of like where people were going on the map. But it was really, really impressive, because I used to think like T1 were the best like early game team I'd ever seen in spring, and then when MSI and like summer came round, I don't think they were anywhere near as good. Even when they won like all LCK and playoffs, they weren't as good. And at the other bits of Worlds, I don't think there was. But specifically against JDG, it was so impressive to see them do it, because it's a massive part of League of Legends. I know LS often talks about how people don't use draft, people don't build correct items. Another big one is folk not using like level 1s when you've got the specific picks. And every single time I was like, T1's got the champions, they're going to go here and ward this, and it was really, really impressive to see such a coherent like understanding from a team of how to punish like a team as good as JDG.
Yeah, on a few of the things you were saying there, if people don't know, the point just to complete the thought you said earlier about banning out Faker, basically the point Kiro was making, sadly, people who only watch Worlds don't know what I'm about to say because they don't fucking do it at Worlds. But when they play in the LPL, Knight has like probably the best champion pool of any mid lane I've ever seen. Like, he unironically can play like about 10 different champions and win on them now, including shit like, even if Syndra's not in the meta, he can just play it and win anyway. He's one of those people who just, doesn't matter, it's a mobile, he'll always find the angle. It's unbelievable. So I agree. It's crazy you just have that in your back pocket like an ace and you never attempt to play that card. Even at the end of the series, you just keep opting into Orianna versus fucking Azir, which, by the way, even if people are going to say that, I'm like, yeah, but Faker was the only one winning that. It's one of the most famous matchups of all time and everyone's been playing it for the last like month or whatever. Like, at that point in time, like, you're playing into what he plays. Instead, if you go with some pick that no one picks, who knows what the fuck happens in that game then? It might be bad, by the way, but could also be awesome. Because similarly, like you were saying, Zabatine, to tie into what you was just saying there, I also think the thing that people have done is, now that they looked awesome in the playoffs, they've made it like they were just awesome the whole time. Like, dude, there was dodges fucking the Swiss system. Like, there was some games there that were, I always have to remind people this, they were looking bad against Team Liquid in the opener. They got fucking dusted off by Gen G, then they beat, what, Cloud9? Spoiler, Cloud9, that hype died in Spring Boys. That team's not even that good. And then they beat BLG, who we've seen is very up and down and no one really knows where they're at. So I agree on the bot lane angle, though. That was overplayed, Zabatine. People made it sound like no one could play any of the bot lanes against them, and if they just pick it, they auto-win. Whereas, like, think of the game JDG won. They won against fucking Caitlyn Ashe. That's literally one of those ones that you can't give Gumayushi Caitlyn. Oh my god, nobody can play Ashe like Keria. They fucking won that game with, by the way, Callista Center bot lane. Like, what even is that? Like, that's just a mad one. So it just shows you that this is why I think this series is like mad undervalued. Because if you look at the result, and you see 3-1, you go, who gives a fuck? T1 smashed them. This was a really close series. Like, it was there was so much play in like a whole bunch of the games, like game 3 and game 4. Fucking hell. I think if you rewind those ones and play it again, who knows what happens? In fact, they almost became mega games and just sort of out of nowhere T1 won, didn't they?
It was really impressive. Like, if you actually, I went back and I was quickly like looking at like the really good bot lanes in my head who like played at Worlds. So I was watching like Ruler with Core JJ. I was watching the 2 iterations of Ming Uzi.
Like old school shit, you mean, right?
Yeah,
okay.
like but not just like any of like the bot lanes that I thought were like good with like win conditions. And when I was watching like Guma Korea, when they were given like a win in bot lane, they basically executed the actual winning portion of it like every single time. Sometimes like the jungler would get to bot lane before owner, or they would overstay. Like Kanavi caught them in that game famously, and like got the kill and turned the game around a bit. But they never actually created like overpushed like losing situations. They would get like the wave crash, they would get the freeze out, they would sometimes get the turret. They would quite often get like the turret dive situation, or the option at least to do it. And it was one of the most dominant like bot lane performances I've like ever seen. I can understand why like teams got like so like obsessed with it, because I can see how like demoralizing that can be. But put it this way, when people were like putting all the picks in and all the bans in and it was happening anyway, like does that not tell you to some degree that like, you know what I mean, we're banning 2, picking a third, and we're still like getting turret dives on like the third wave? Like, it's still not a great look. That the bot lane was so impressive to me at Worlds. Them and Zeus. Zeus is like winning matchup, like understanding of like winning matchups. He was like the only person on the NAR game that I've seen like outright beat Bin and an isolated like 1v1 situation. I think both like sides of the map had such like amazing like executions of resources that were given to them. And put it this way, I would never have thought that, given like the meta that they're in right now, that Guma would have probably been like as good in this meta. He, without like the ability to like consistently go on to things like Aphelios and Jinx, as we like moved away from them. But he looked really, really, really good, and he was like a massive like win condition for like T1 on like ADC in almost every situation.
I think
It was just
there is
massive.
Oh, sorry.
No, go
Oh,
on.
no, you go.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I think there is something that is probably because people are gonna go look back at this. I hope people, and especially specialists of the game, coaches, analysts, casters, are gonna look back at this T1 version of T1 and learn. I think there is a lot of study. But for me, it's the team that has put the most homework in terms of how to work on League of Legends, learn about the fundamentals of the game. I think the game has a we scrapped off most of the basics of the macro in the first, I don't know, 8 years of the game. And now we are fine tuning, right? We are trying to get more than just, we have the position, we win. So there is a lot of very, very small details about what your players need to do in a way to achieve a fully controlled game. For instance, the second game against LNG in quarters is probably the best example of it. And what you mentioned is actually very interesting, because ADCs just think about doing damage. And most ADCs, it's just they get spoon-fed resources and they are there for the team fight, right? There is a full understanding of Gumayusi and Keria about when Keria needs to move and why he needs to move. But Keria can only move if Gumayusi is doing exactly what is needed for Keria to move. And so there is a complete understanding of the whole roster of the 5 men about what is needed for Keria to be able to drop these 2 wards that are going to allow us to control this flank, that's going to allow us to control this Drake, that's going to allow us to control the pace of the game. There is a whole, Russian doll sequence of decision that leads to T1 being exactly where they need to be to defend something that they shouldn't be able to defend otherwise. And there is a plenty. You spoke about Zeus, and I think it's a very good example. If you do just a full deep dive analysis of the top, you're going to see that Zeus has played every single matchup knowing that nobody could afford to go to his lane ever.
Yeah.
He will have the only thing he had to do is never be froze. If he gets frozen, the whole game plan of T1 falls apart. So he has only one job: is don't take a bad trade, just play the lane, push the wave, crash, use your HP to crash, wait for the bounce, lose 5, 6, 7, 8 CS if it's needed, pop off in team fight because you're gonna get like the vision control. And that's where I see like they have done more homework, because I feel like every pieces of this roster has very well understood the win condition on the map but all the previous sequences to lead to this winning position. Whereas most of the teams, even if they are better at executing these positions, such as JNG or JDG, it's still in control. You see what I mean? It's still like the 2-3 causal chains that lead to this position. They have somehow a grasp of it, but they don't have a very precise idea of like step 1, step 2, step 3. And I think that's the difference maker for this version of T1. That is how impressive they've been at understanding all of this. And I think especially Guma is one of the smartest ADC that I've seen ever, because he understands win condition, whereas most ADC are just like minion, click, click, minion, click, click, and that's it.
Yeah, I will say that's also why I got a bit ticked off with the fact that the whole thing isn't even T1, it's just Faker. Like, we're just talking like it's a 1v1 game. It's because, dude, like you're saying, the top lane was basically the old school top lane island, and Zeus, for real, 1v1. Think about who he went up against, guys. Zika, fucking 369 into the Shy. Like, those are like the best top laners, well, except for the Shy in the world, and then the Shy even had a pop off at this Worlds. Like, you can't ask for more than that. This guy was actually, the difference is, yes, I agree, Faker was actually the best mid, but mid was fucking ass at this tournament. Like I said, it was just Orianna versus Zay the whole bloody time. Like, that's not where you get the awesome mid lane. And then this is actually the only Worlds I've ever seen where it didn't look like mid lane just wins you the game. Like, that isn't necessarily where you want your best player. Like, top lane was mega influential. Think about Baden, dude. He almost got them to the final 2. No matter what PLG was doing, they were trolling in some of the games. So I think top lane was massively underrated. I mean, I get it, because in the West, everyone just ignores it. We think you just have to play tanks because we don't have carry top laners, do we? Like, or rather we do, but they just fucking die all the time. Like, people don't know. You have to watch the LPL, guys. Like, top lane carries the fuck out of games in the LPL.
I've got like my own like theories on League of Legends. I actually think like for quite a while now, outside of like specific like concentrated like Aphelios and Jinx comps, which can be really toxic, I think top lane's the most broken role in the game. It's way too flexible. The amount of, and it's how easy it is to like isolate. And when you've got like the best players in top lane, you can't bail the person out of, because if you've got a bad mid laner, when you've actually got a bad mid laner, it's easier to bail the person out because it's how close it is to all the other roles in the game. Even top laners can gank mid, and you know what I mean. We've seen Adam do it for his mid laner a lot. So when you're in an isolated top lane matchup, it's so much harder. I think that's the big hallmark we've seen is everyone always talks about Korean teams at Worlds. The famous thing is they play from bot to top. It's like this thing that everyone says. And this was a year of like the bot lane, they didn't play from bot to top. They used like their bot lead. And because the bot lead was so big, they were able to turn it into also a top lead because the enemy jungler had no choice but to be on bot wave or the amount of like resources that you were going to be losing. And because you knew where you were pulling the jungler to, you'd have these winning topside matchups and these very 50-50 mid matchups. And you'd end up winning on both sides of the map. And when you win on both sides of the map, one thing I would say.
By the way, on that, I have to say the joke. Even though Zabatene's here, so I understand it might be a bit sensitive. The joke is they are basically the reverse BDS Zabatene. Because you know, in BDS, right, this is where Monty is just too generous. He would make it sound sometimes like, oh, and actually Adam really understands his role. Like what he's doing is he pressures constantly top, so that way Crowley's like free bottom and the jungle has to come top on it. And it's like, I don't know about that, Monty. I think he'd do that in solo queue. And so the joke is the opposite. Like the bot lane actually unlocks Zeus to just be the monster in the top lane, right? I see what you mean.
So, like, but this is also a weird one because this was one of the first worlds and a little bit of the last one where mid jungle just didn't really matter. And like that was usually mid jungle duos like dominate worlds, and that's why I was quite high on like Scout and Tarzan and their ability to be able to abuse and execute. And then when we actually seen the format play out, the good teams basically ignored it. Chovy Peanut basically didn't do it. Kanavi Knight didn't do it. Owner basically never ganked for Faker at all at this World Championship, apart from some earlier group games. It was very, very, very strange to see how teams, even though they had all different strategies about the game, they all kind of agreed on this one like principle that like mid jungle 2v2s were out, and it was more just about like handshaking and playing to the sides.
Yeah, I mean, I think first it was very, very scaling matchups in mid, and there has been a significant effort from Riot Games to narrow the early impact of control mages. If you look at Azir, Orianna, or Syndra, after the rework, they are just the shadow of themselves, of the champions they were like 3 or 4 years ago in terms of like the amount of impact they can have in early game. Like an auto attack of Orianna does like 35 damage or something. So you're not gonna go places with these champions. Fortunately, I'd say. They've never won mid jungle for T1, but they never lost it. I think the time they were the most attacked was the quarterfinals against LNG, and every time they came ahead, even on top of that. So I think it was very hard because I personally think that Faker has been playing better than most of the time I've seen him in the last 2 years during these Worlds. I think he has been extremely consistent in lane, and he has had pop-off moments that we have had seen less of, I would say, in the last like 2-3 years, of like these big Faker moments where he does like a know some shockwave or like the Azir play on Ruler where he predicts the flash. Like he's been very clutch. But yeah, it's a role that I think suits him perfectly, right? It's like narrow down enemies' options, play the lane as well as you can, and wait for jungle support to come to your lane and then move on the strong side of the map. And since they were winning both sides, and Keria was always free, I think it was kind of a perfect seat for Faker to express himself as a player, because there has not really been threats of like, I don't know, Akalis and Sylas in lane with like very explosive 2v2s. Like if you were playing Akali, since Akali suffers a lot, like she bleeds a lot early game, and bot lane was already dying, and top lane was already dying. If you give free prio to Faker, and your buff side lanes are already on the point of being dove, like you're gonna get dove. So everybody had to play as much pressure, as much of the match, 50-50 matchup against control mages. And unfortunately, this meta, you couldn't outban control mages because you had Azir, Syndra, and Orianna. And if you ban these three, he just goes for Nico or Ahri. So there is five champions that will give you prio, and you cannot counter them, because if you counter them, you have to take a melee, so you don't have lane control. If you don't have lane control, the enemy mid laner is on your bot turret at wave 3 and the game's over. So it was a I mean, the planets, once again, I respect so much this T1 team because, as I say, like they outworked everyone, I'm pretty sure, in terms of understanding the game. But the planets aligned very well in the sense of there was really no clear, oh, we just do that and it's going to work. Like, you had to find a way that nobody, like, we would have to play probably 50 more games of World right now on the very same patch for other teams to figure out how do we beat T1.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.